Welcome to my annual UI UX crash course. I've done this for years now on this channel, and it's exciting because it's a brand new time to get new people into the industry of UI UX design. And yes, even in spite of all the recent AI developments, there's still going to be a huge need, even more so in my opinion, for expert human-based UI designers. And so in this course, I'm going to show you how to use Figma, which is the most popular UI UX design prototyping app, in order to build this layout that you see here. So it's a relatively simple layout, but instead of just showing you, how to use the tools and, where to place certain elements, I'm going to also discuss the why as we go along. We're going to discuss things like basic UI principles like visual hierarchy, typography, white space, contrast, all that good stuff. And by the end of it, if you follow along, which I advise you to do because there's project files in the YouTube description, which are completely free, you decide, hey, this is actually really cool. I want to learn more. Definitely check out DesignCourse.com, which is my site, where I have a full 16-hour interactive UI UX course with challenges and all that good stuff. So before we get to that part, follow along here, and I think you might just have a ton of fun. All right, so the first thing I want you to do is to go to Figma.com and create an account, and you can download the Figma desktop app, or you can work within the browser. So the same tool is basically available in the browser or through a desktop app. I'm using the desktop app right here. The second thing I want you to do is to download the project files that will allow you to easily follow along. They're just some assets like the ones you see here. And you do that by clicking the link here in the YouTube description, and you'll be able to open that up. When you open it up, you're going to see over here it says Pages, Assets. I've named this page Assets. So you can have multiple pages for organization purposes, essentially. And these are the assets that we're going to be copying, pasting into our layout that we build. Before we get started though, just two really important keyboard shortcuts that you're going to see me using very fast. And it's really just baked into muscle memory at this point, are to zoom. You hold Control and your mouse scroll wheel in and out. So I'm always kind of getting real close into certain things sometimes. And then also to pan, you hold your space bar and left click and drag. So sometimes you might get in here and you might move things around. You'll see me doing that, very quickly. So at first, these are things that you have to consciously remember. Okay, what was that? Control, no big deal. So what we're gonna do is create a new page by clicking this little plus sign right here. And we're gonna name this layout. Okay. So as you see, we're in this big blank black void, essentially. This is where all of our design occurs, but we can't design in this area because we haven't created a frame. And so right down here in this toolbar right here, you'll see these different icons. And the first one is the frame tool, all right? Or you can hit F for that tool on your keyboard as a shortcut. And when you select that, this panel over here is what's called the property inspector. So when you select a piece of text or you select some other item or a frame or whatever, it will show you associated properties that you can adjust or select from over here in this panel. So you can see right here, we can see with the frame tool, and what the frame tool essentially is it's where you place your UI design, essentially. And you have to choose, an actual dimension for that. Now, you can't just left click and drag a frame out of any size, just like that. Or if you select this, you could select a predefined size right over here based on popular sizes, essentially. So like, for instance, presentation, we have a 16 by 9, 1920 by 1080. Those are just pixels, 1,920 pixels by 10,080 pixels. That's width by height. I typically start web designs on this right here, the 1920 by 1080. And that's basically a desktop UI design first approach. Some people like to go, they start at like a mobile viewport first. I personally like going at a desktop first because it's easier to imagine the full experience and design for the full experience and then remove things as you work your way down to like a smaller device size like this phone than it is to do the opposite. And that's how I've always designed. But there's no absolute right or wrong way. It's like however you prefer to work best. All right. So now that we have this on here, we can easily change it, you know, the width and height by adjusting this. It doesn't have to be 1920, right? I mean, it could be, you know, almost any size, but for now, I'm going to keep it right around here anyhow. Now, the first thing that, you know, we kind of have to ask ourselves as UI UX designers is you know, do we have assets already that are accompanying this design? Do we have a color scheme already? Do we have a logo? You know, those are very important questions you have to ask yourself. But sometimes if you're a solopreneur, freelancer, you might be tasked with handling all that stuff. So there's a broad umbrella of things that, you know, you need to consider as a UI UX designer. So for us, I'm going to go ahead back to our assets, and we do have a logo already, and it's this right here where it says fire your team. So positive. And if I go back to layout, with that selected, we hit Control C to copy, by the way. We can go back to our assets, or our layout page rather, and just paste that in. Now we're not going to be able to see it because the background is white and the logo is white. So what I envisioned for this page is the hero section, which the hero section is kind of like the first portion of a layout a person sees when the website loads on the browser or on their phone. It's going to have like a purple background, and that color is going to be based on this purple color already found in this flame little icon of the logo. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take we could use, there's a couple different tools and methods for doing this. We could use a frame to create the hero section rectangle, or you could use a rectangle itself as well. You can see there's tools like here, like the rectangle tool, the line tool, the arrow tool, the ellipse, the polygon, etc. We could just use a frame for this. And so if I left click and drag from the top left, zoom out a little bit. There we go. Just down here or so, we'll see we've created a frame. Now, frames by default don't have fills added to them. So now that we have this frame selected, you can see here in the layers, right over here, it says frame 1. You can see that we have our properties. There's a lot of different confusing properties right here, which we'll work our way through eventually. But the one that we're interested in now is in adding a fill. So to add a fill, we click a plus. And by default, it's white, so it doesn't look like much has changed. And we want to grab that color. Now, that color happens to be right here, this purple color. Notice how it says selection colors. There's white and this purple. Well, it's doing that because we wrapped a frame around this logo, and it finds all the colors that are inside of it. So it's a quick and easy way for us to change colors. So if I wanted to change this purple color, say to like red, well, there it goes. We've now changed it red. We don't want to do that, so I'm going to back up with Control Z. But all I want to do is just grab that color, and maybe instead of grabbing that color and just kind of copy and paste it in different areas, we should utilize styles. And what that is in UI design, you have a color scheme, and these colors are reused multiple times throughout, you know, the design process of a layout. And it makes sense to add them as a part of a style library because, for instance, if you're working with a client and they say, okay, I want this purple color. Go ahead and design it with this purple color. And you spend all this time designing a bunch of different pages with this purple color being utilized in different areas. If then they say, hey, we decided to change the color to like orange. Well, you would manually have to go to each little section, and wherever that purple color is, you'd have to manually paste in a new value to get to an orange value, right? Well, if you add it as a part of a styles library or an asset, styles asset, what you can do is then just change it in one location and will update all areas. So you definitely want to get in a habit of that. So all we have to do that is we click right here and notice the little plus sign. We click plus, and we'll call this primary color. All right, and that is the value. So create variable. Okay, so now if I want to take this fill, all we have to do is we can click on Libraries tab right here and then click on primary color. There we go. So now we have our hero section right here, and we have the logo in the upper left corner, which is a typical pattern. like 99 out of 100 times, the logo on a website is going to be upper left. So you can't really go wrong. Let me go ahead and mute this phone because that is highly annoying. Okay, so now another thing I wanted to, before we start designing more so, to make you aware of is alignment. And alignment is super important, especially when you're designing. And one of the things that you do typically to ensure equal alignment and white space is if we click on the actual frame, notice how it says slide 1920. We could double click that and change that. Like for instance, this is our home page. I'll just call this the home page. All right. If we select it, then we can come over here and you could see right down here at the bottom, layout grid. So if we click plus, we're going to go ahead and change this to a columns-based grid. Now, if we click on this little icon right there, we can change the count, as many of these little weird-looking columns as we want. For me, I'm only going to just choose one. I know, it's kind of strange. You can't really tell what it did, but what we want to do is to add a margin. So if I add this margin like 120, notice how we can kind of see, and we can also change the color. It's like this red color. Like if I make it white and maybe we increase this opacity value a little bit more, we can see it more so. Essentially what this will do is it shows us it's not a part of the design because we can toggle this grid off. So if we select the artboard, we can toggle this on and off like that by clicking this little eye icon. It allows us to see the very left and the very right side of the design. And that way we'll know, for instance, okay, so our logo needs to be right on that edge. And then if there's a little button over here, which there will be, it needs to be right on the edge of that area as well. And in that way we have equal white space on the right and left. White space, by the way, is just another term for negative space or empty space, like just blank space. It's one of the very important UI foundational principles, which I'll talk about more. So get in the habit of using a grid system of some sort. 12 column grid systems are also, pretty popular. For me, we're not going to use that. The only context we're going to use it is just to define the very left and right side of our design for now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and toggle that back off momentarily. And now what we need to do is we need to create the navigation. All right, so we have our logo up here. And a UI design pattern for navigation that's very common is to have your logo and then have a navigation. Now, the most simple form is have your logo on the left and a horizontal navigation on your right. It says like home here, about us, contact, frequently asked questions, all that stuff. We're going to have something a little bit, a slight play on that. We're going to have a middle navigation and then a primary header call to action button on the right. All right. So here's how this works. I'm going to show you the way that you typically don't want to do it, and then I'll show you the way that you do want to typically do it. And obviously that means nothing at this point, but you'll see what I mean in a second. So what we'll do is hit T, and that gives us the type tool. All right, same thing as clicking down there. If we left click and then just type in home, for instance, all right, so we have white text. If yours isn't white, it might not be. You just come over here in the property inspector, you click on fill, this color, and then you could change it to white by dragging this up here. Okay, that's great. So I'm also using a font called Manrope. All right, so you want to search for that font called Manrope, and you'll see it right there. All right, and I like that font. It's a simple font. You can't go wrong with it. You also can't go wrong with other fonts such as Inter, I-N-T-E-R. There's also Montserrat, there's Poppins, there's a bunch of different fonts that you can use from or choose from essentially. For this font size, now font size is very important. And this comes down to another foundational UI principle called typography. All right, there's a lot involved in typography, but just to get started, scale is one of them, and that's one of the most important. It's one of the things that newbies tend to get wrong. The size of your type, how big should it be? Well, that introduces yet another UI foundation, and that's called visual hierarchy. Sounds scary? It's not. Essentially, it's basically giving priority to certain elements, and it's establishing the priority of certain elements based on their importance, okay? So a navigation is very important, but in the context of a full UI design, it's not quite as important as like the headline. The headline in the hero section is typically going to be the biggest sized piece of type that you have on your page. So that's really important to get, to understand. And you'll see how, once we get to that part, you'll see how that all comes into play. For our a navigation, though, we don't want it to be too large and we don't want it to be too small. Too small might be a size like this. Look how small that is. Like, that's a small home button. That would be hard to click on, and it's hard to read, most importantly. Now, too big, that might be something like this. This might be just a tad bit too large, in my opinion, especially in relation to the size of the logo. So there's a balancing act, and you will eventually develop the eye for that. So I'm just going to choose a size of around 24 bold. All right, that's the font weight. So instead, actually, you know what? I might not use bold. Instead, I might use regular for this, and that would work just fine as well. Okay, so now let's say, okay, we know we want a home button. We might want to have maybe another one called AI Solutions. Okay, now notice how I moved it over and it has a lot of white space between. Okay, again, another foundational UI principle, white space. How close or how far away should these things be together? Should it be this close? Obviously not. It would be very difficult to read that. Should it be this close? Well, let's think here. That's pretty close. I would say, honestly, that's too close, given the space that we have available to us. So you have to think about all these minute little things. And so I'm going to move this maybe over here. Now, what if, for instance, let's say we want to have a little down arrow, because this might be a secondary page. Like if you hover over it or you click on it, it will reveal a submenu. So how would we get a little arrow? Well, there's multiple ways to do that. You could take the pen tool down here. So if we click that, we left click here, hold shift, create like a 45-degree angle. And then we left click right there. We hit escape once we're done. We could change the stroke to white. Maybe increase the thickness by selecting right here and using your keyboard mouse arrow up. You can increase that to 2. All right. And so this could be a little down arrow that works for our design, right? Okay, great. Now let's say, for instance, after that, we have another one called maybe FAQ, for frequently asked questions. And then we'll have another one called contact. Okay. So what I did, by the way, is Control D to duplicate those, and I just moved them over. And one of the things that's really cool about Figma is when you move things around and it kind of detects that you're working within a pattern, it'll show you that, hey, you have 56 pixels. You can kind of see that little reddish orange area right here. It says 56 between all 3 of these. That's to let you know that you have equal white space between those elements. That's great. And this right here is a very suitable navigation in and of itself. So if I select all these, we can kind of get this centered up, maybe right around there. And then we can have our button on the right. Now, this is all fine, the way we just structured that, but it's not utilizing some of the features of Figma that could definitely make your life easier. And so let me show you what I mean by that. If we were to reconstruct this the proper way, you'll see how flexible and dynamic Figma can be as a UI designer. So what I'm going to do is we're going to leave these here for now. I'm going to create a new frame above this existing frame. So I'm going to hit F on the keyboard for the frame tool. I'm going to left click and just drag something roughly like that. And I'm going to hit the I key on my keyboard. And that allows us, with that selected, to make the background color this color. Okay, so what we want to do is let's just take our home Actually, let's take this AI Solutions because it has the drop-down icon with it. If we take the AI Solutions button and we take both of those elements and we select both of them. Now, the way you do that, by the way, there's multiple ways to select multiple layers, essentially, is we could double-click into this and select just this right here, then hold Shift and select that as well. You can notice over here, Vector 1 and AI Solutions are selected, or you can manually select them over here by selecting Vector 1 and holding Control and selecting the other element that we want to select. What we could do with those selected is we can come over here and we could choose Create Component or Control-Alt-K. Now, when you create a component, it will wrap it in an outline that is kind of like purple. And it also makes it purple, the actual text over here with this little icon. So what a component is, it's basically a reusable element. All right, and it will make your life tremendously easier if you make use of this sort of thing. So what we want to do is we're going to move this physically over here from that frame to this frame. And with it selected, we can create what's called a component variant. All right, sounds scary. It's not. The way you create it is this little button up there where it says, a little plus sign where it says Add Variant. So when you click Add Variant, it creates a duplicate inside of this little dashed container. And what this allows us to do is essentially create a secondary state or many different states of the same component. And let's say we know one of the differences between this navigation, like for instance, these three do not have drop-down icons. Only that one element did, the AI Solutions, the one that we pulled out. Well, we can make that dynamic. And what we could do is like this top one, the original that we created, if we double click into enough, far enough into this little stack to where we select Vector 1, all we have to do is with it selected in the layers, we can click on this little eye icon and that hides it. So this would be without an icon, and then this one would be with an icon. Very cool, but that's not cool yet because you haven't seen me actually utilize and implement this component. So what we can do now is we can go over here to Assets, and then we could click on here and we can see we only have one component in there, and that's the AI Solutions component. It's the button component. We can left click and drag this over here, and now let's delete this, and this. Let's go ahead and put this bad boy right there. And I'm going to double click this to change the text. We're going to call this Home. All right. All right, so with that selected, I'm just going to drag this in. And essentially, I'm going to take this and duplicate it. Control D, hold Shift and move it over here. And then I'm going to double click and we're going to change this to AI Solutions, which is our second link. And then with it selected for component 3, we can see up here where it says property 1, variant 2. We want to change that to variant 2. Now when we do this, if I drag this out, you can see now we have the little icon that showed up. And that's because this right here, we've named it variant 2. Or we could say with icon, like that. So now when I come back and I select it, you can see property 1, it says with icon, or with dropdown or whatever you want to name it. And so that's super cool. Now, now that we've created 2 of these elements, the real cool thing about this is we can select both of these by holding Shift, both of these links, these nav items, and we can create a auto layout. And you do that under the layout section in the property inspector right here by clicking this button. Now, when you do that, it's going to change all this stuff underneath it. And auto layout, trust me, there's some people that live and die by auto layout. They add auto layout to everything possible. And if you go on to like Reddit, like the Figma subreddit, they'll say if you don't put auto layout on every single element possible known to man, then you're just doing it wrong. I personally disagree. I use mine a little bit more sparingly, and the amount and the degree to which you use auto layout, which it might be confusing to you at this point because you don't even know what it is, will depend on who you're working with. If you're working with like a large team and people are working with your files and stuff, you might want to utilize it more. For me, I can find that it kind of just slightly, barely slows me down, and sometimes I won't use it on every element. It completely makes sense to use it on anything that has like a repeating list of some sort, because I'll show you how powerful it is in a second. What it allows you to do, now that we've confined everything inside of this auto layout, which by the way, when you add an auto layout around an element, it adds a frame around them. So notice we did just have a component 1 and component 2, but now those are nested within this frame, which is an auto layout frame. So what we can do is we could select like the home button and duplicate it. And notice how it maintained that white space consistently between them. That's very cool. Now we could also left click and just drag this and put it over here to the right. That's very cool as well. So now we could put a FAQ button right there. And then we can also go ahead and select this and duplicate it. And this could be a contact button. So let's change that to contact. Got SpongeBob case there. All right, so that's contact. Okay, so now that we have this navigation inside of an auto layout, we can do some really cool stuff. For instance, notice right here how it says horizontal gap between objects. We can just increase this as much as we want or decrease it. So it's a really fast way of automatically adjusting the white space between the elements. If we had not wrapped this in an auto layout, we would have had to manually move each item if we wanted to increase or decrease the white space between the elements. So that's a very handy feature. You can also make this a vertical list just by clicking this little down button over here. There's a lot more that you can do in terms of like centering stuff or not centering stuff. Very, very, very cool. So let's go ahead back to a horizontal layout. Looks like we had that old one right there. There we go. Okay. So now we can also utilize positioning. So because we want this to be centered absolutely within the very center of our layout, we can click this align horizontal right there. That'll let us know this is in the direct center of this, this layout or this frame right here. All right, so now let's move on to the next element, which is going to be a primary call to action or basically a navigation header nav based, a nav bar call to action. And a call to action, that's a industry term for button, essentially, like an important button that you want people to click on, all right? So for us, we're gonna have one called Hire Us, like Hire Us. And so to do that, we're gonna create another component for it, and it's gonna go right over here, right aligned to our grid. So I'm gonna turn on the grid by selecting the frame and clicking the visibility eye icon. Now we can see the very edge of that area. And what we'll do is, if we just take a look at that, that's man rope, regular, 24 pixels, that's good. So if I use my type tool, we're gonna say Hire Us. There we go. And this time I want it to be bold, okay? And we're gonna actually wrap this into a button container, okay? So to do that, we can hit the frame tool, F, left click, and wrap it around, kind of somewhere right around there. Now, we're also going to go ahead and give this a fill. It is going to be white as it is. And we're going to have slightly rounded corners, which you can do that under the appearance section and just kind of left click and drag that. And you can kind of see automatically as you do this, it's adjusting the size of that. Now, we're going to have to take the text inside of it. You may have to hold Control and then left click to select it because it's hard to see. And then we're going to make this our libraries, our primary color right there. There we go. Now we can also select both of the elements, the frame 3 and itself, and then we could click auto layout. Now when you click auto layout, it doesn't seem like anything changes, but it's smart enough to know we want the text inside of it to stay in the center. So no matter how large we make this, guess what? It's going to stay in the center. Very cool. Now it also makes sense to make this button a component as well. So we can click Create Component. We can drag it up here. And Now that it's a component, we can add a component variant once again by clicking this plus sign right up here. All right, now let's say for instance for our this button, we want to have a hover state where it changes appearance somehow. A real common, I guess you could say, pattern for having a hover button micro interaction is to make the hover state kind of like flip or reverse colors. So in this case, with this second one selected, we can get rid of the fill, we can give it a stroke, make the stroke white, all right? And then inside of it, we grab that text, which currently is hidden, and we can break this chain link right here and change the color to white. So now, if we switch up here to prototype mode, it's a tab, then we can hover over it, and when we hover over, you'll see this little plus sign on the top one. Let's drag it to the bottom one. And what this does is it gives us this little option, trigger. Well, a trigger is like what is going to make it switch to this other variant. Well, it's not going to be click. We want it to be hover. So we click while hovering right there. Now you can see there's obviously other options. We want to use while hovering. And then it's going to say change to variant 2. We don't have to mess with this because we already dragged that connection manually to it. And then animation's instant, which I want, but you could also do smart animate, which is very cool. We could possibly have a little bit more experience with that in a second, a little bit later, but that will just kind of create an automatic tweening of, you know, the different positions or colors between them, and it creates a cool animation effect. But for me, we're gonna just leave it at instant, and you'll kind of see what happens. So now that we have that, we have to actually drag this back on by going to our assets, drag this new component, this button component, right here and get it lined up right where we need it. We switch back to design mode. There we go. Notice how I'm looking at these little guides that show us it's the exact horizontal center of the navigation to the left. Alignment, very important. So now that we have that, I can go ahead and select this artboard and hide that grid. And now, if I click play up here, let's go ahead and select artboard and click this little play icon. It's going to open up a new tab, and watch what happens when we hover. Very cool. It's working. All right, so you could also have hover states for these if you wanted to, all that good stuff. So let's go back to our other tab. You can leave this one open, by the way. And let's continue on. Okay, so that is the navigation that we've created. Another thing that I will mention is, let's say, for instance, we're happy with this nav. It would entirely make sense to select this element right here, this element, and this element, those three elements, and create an auto layout out of them. But first I'm going to create or make them a component. So your entire header, your nav bar can be a component, because realistically, this site, this fictional business has multiple pages. It has a AI solutions page. It has a fact page, a contact page. So that means you're going to have artboards for each one of those pages and in each one of those unique designs. That means that the header, the nav bar, is going to be on those. So if you make a component, you only have to update that component like up here, and then it's updated in all the other areas. So if we select those three again, and we click right up here to create a component, then we'll create an auto layout. And you can see right here some options. What we want to do for the width, we want to change this to auto, and then it changes these little icons right here. What that means is, if I go back to a width of 329 and I try to like change the scale of this, notice how nothing changes, right? If we change this to auto, watch what happens now. It stays like that. And the reason that's a little bit handy is because it allows you to quickly or more easily, like let's say for instance, we needed to create a variation of this design to work on tablet. Well, the width only might be like this wide, not this desktop size. So that way we can quickly just, you know, put it right there and then just be done with it. So that's the utility of utilizing something like that. So very nice. There we go. That's good there. And then what I would do is maybe take this frame too. We could extend it out further. We could grab this. This is our original component, our master component, if you will. We could edit it up here, and then let's just drag it as an instance right here. And then we can just center it perfectly. Okay, so now that we have, although let me take a look at that. Looks like we might be off center. So if we take our home page and I bring this back, we can modify this. There we go. So that everything is where it needs to be. Awesome. Okay, so now I can go ahead and hide that. Move it up. Okay, awesome. So now what we want to do is focus on the hero section. So the space underneath your navigation is typically called a hero section. And this is where you can get really creative, especially for like a sales landing page like this. You want to make sure there's a few key ingredients that you pretty much need to have in every single hero section for a website marketing landing page. And that is a really strong headline. All right. And then also a call to action, give them something to do, whether it's to scroll down to learn more about something, whether it's a button to click or a form to fill out, something like that. So for us, I'm going to go ahead and put in some type. We're going to hit the type tool, left click, and we are going to put in, let me look at my reference code right here. I forget what the actual headline. Yeah, there it is. The AI agent revolution has arrived. Okay, so I'm going to put in all caps, or actually title case, the AI agent revolution has arrived. Okay. So clearly the size of this is way too small, all right? So that's bad typographic visual hierarchy. What we want is this to be much larger. So with it selected, we can boost this bad boy up to like 100 or something. Well, what's that look like? Oh, well, if it's all one line, that looks a bit too big, right? So we can left click and drag this in. All right, that's a little bit better, all right? Actually, that's a lot better than what it was. And I'm going to choose to maybe put this on the lower left corner, and we're going to use a kind of like a terminal system font called Consolas. So if I type in Consolas and hit enter, it kind of gives us this kind of like an old school terminal feel. I kind of like this font for tech related ideas like this. And then now I want to fine tune the font size. So I can just left click and right here where it says 100 for the font size, and then just use my keyboard mouse down or up, or not mouse, but the keyboard down or up arrow. So we can fine tune it as much as we think works. Trust me, there's a big difference between 86 and 100, all right? So kind of just get into the idea of, I'm gonna make it bold too, of really trying to fine tune the size of your type, all right? So I like this as is. It's debatable if we want it bold or regular. Maybe regular is fine. It's not a huge deal. And then over here, we're going to have a primary call to action. So this is a call to action up here. It's a header-based one, but we want the primary call to action in our hero section to be the one element that really sticks out a lot. So it's going to be bigger. We're going to reinforce the visual hierarchy, place it high up on the priority list by making it an element that it's very easily visible. You could do that through contrast and color, also through scale. So the bigger something is, the higher degree that somebody is going to notice it first, right? So the same thing like with the text. The bigger it is, the chances are that's what your eye is going to be drawn to first. Okay, so let's create that button. And really, we're not going to do anything fancy with that button. It's going to be really just a copy of this Hire Us button, except larger. Okay, so what we could do is we can come over here and take this Hire Us button, make it larger, and can we increase the font size of this? Well, yes, we can. So that's very cool. So we can reuse the same element. And I'm going to change the text though. So for this text, we're going to change this to agentize my business. All right. Okay. Now, is this too big? I think it's fine as is. Probably right there. I might make it a little bit smaller so we could take the font size, scale it down just a bit. And I think right there looks pretty good. I'm going to take the home page and drag this down a little bit more. Okay. So now what's cool is if we go ahead and select the artboard, hit play, we could see Agentize My Business and Hire Us both behave exactly the same. Okay. So now before we move on, you might be wondering yourself, this kind of looks bland. I mean, you have this ocean of blue here and nothing else, really? Right, I agree. Because my intention was not to leave it like this. In this area, there's a lot of different things you can do. As a UI designer, you can make the determination, okay, hey, we're going to put a video-based background here. Maybe it's like a watermark. And a watermark is just basically a low contrast element where you can easily read the type and you can easily see all the important navigation stuff on top of it. So contrast is extremely important when you're using either a video-based background or just an image-based background that's not moving, that doesn't have movement. You have to be able to read type if it's sitting behind type, whatever the asset is. So what I ended up doing is I used Midjourney, which is an AI image generation service. It interfaces with something called Discord, which is a chat app, where you issue it prompts and it creates pictures and images for you, essentially. And if we go back to the assets page, you'll see this thing right here. This right here, I was able to generate with Midjourney. I'm not going to get into that right now and how to do that. But basically, I also took it into Photoshop and kind of added this little effect right here on top of it. Again, all this stuff, you want to get more into this, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel where I talk about all this crazy stuff and show you much more in depth, and also check out the UI UX course, of course. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and copy this. So Control C while selecting it. And we're going to go back to our layout. And with this frame selected, I'm just going to go ahead and paste that in. And notice how it's on top of everything. That's not a big deal because that's your layer stack over here. What you want to do, if you want to put it at the very bottom, you can use your bracket keys on your keyboard. So if you hit the left bracket key, it puts it at the very bottom of your layer stack. So now we can see all this stuff here. Now, the important thing about this image that I used is it's constructed in such a way that it still allows you to easily read the type that's sitting on top of it. You can easily see this button. You can easily see the Hire Us button. You can easily read these links up here. I can't stress how freaking important that is because I've done thousands of design reviews from aspiring UI UX designers as a part of my course at DesignCourse.com. And contrast in choosing the right image is extremely important. If we right click and we go to plugins, and you can go to manage plugins and you can search for a plugin called Unsplash. Unsplash is a free plugin. And what it does is allows you to search through completely free pictures that you can use. So if I just click on one of these predefined searches like abstract, maybe instead of using that other one, we click this one. Sometimes it doesn't work as expected. Let me select this image. Let's see. Okay, so we chose this one. This would actually be a bad image to choose. The reason being, we have light blue with white text on top. It's too hard to read. That's not an ideal use of color in contrast. So when it comes to text, it needs to contrast a lot more like this. That's way more easy to read. So continuing on, I want to change this from primary color. I think we're going to change that to a black. So if we just unlink it and click black, there we go. All right. So now if this were realized on the front end, this might be a background that kind of has movement to it. There's a lot of different cool things called 3JS and shader effects. We're not going to get into that though, but this could be a really cool hero section. So now let's focus on the area underneath it. All right. So for landing pages, there's a few key concepts or things that you need to include in order to maximize conversion ratios. Because at the end of the day, your purpose is not to build a beautiful site. It's to build an app or a marketing landing page in this course that converts, that gets people from visitor to the desired action. And so having testimonials, having quotes from prominent figures, having trust symbols like logos of brands that have used your product perhaps in some way, shape, or form is very important. So for us, I'm going to create a quote, a fictional quote from Jensen Huang. Is that how you pronounce his name? The NVIDIA CEO. We're going to put a quote here from him. It's fictional. He didn't actually say this. We have to say that for legal purposes, I think. And so what we're going to do is with the type tool, left click and drag to create a text area. And I'm going to type in AI agents are going to be in every company helping to automate processes and augment human capabilities. Actually, you know what? He did say that. What am I talking about? Okay, I didn't just make that up. So now, you need to give us permission to use it on our fake website though. We're going to, with Manrope, we're going to make this a regular font size and we're going to make it larger than what it currently is, and we're going to center it with the center buttons right there. Okay, so I think that's probably pretty good right there. And we can make sure it's centered by clicking center up here, and the text is centered itself. Okay. You know what? We might be able to make this a little bit larger in font size. So maybe somewhere around there. You could even go light with this. Now notice for this section underneath the hero section, I'm not putting it right here. That would lack way too much white space. We want our sections to breathe, especially on desktop where we have all this space that we can use. One of the biggest things that will throw off or give me a clue that a person's a newbie UI UX designer is their usage of white space. Sometimes things are spread out way too far, like way down here. Like who wants to have to scroll all the way until they get to this stuff? No, there's a nice breathing room, so to speak. You don't want it too close or too far. So then I'm also going to go ahead and put his name, which honestly, I don't know how to spell off the top of my head, so I probably got that wrong. So another thing, like I mentioned briefly before, typographic visual hierarchy, very important. We want his name underneath the quote to be the same exact size? No. The quote's more important than the person's name, so therefore we're going to make it smaller. Okay, maybe somewhere around there. And we could also use what's called auto width. That's this icon underneath layout. Okay, so it stays the size of the actual type and the height. And we can also put a little line next to it. So we can use the line tool, L, on your keyboard, which is also accessible through here. So we can put a little dash. How nice is that? And by the way, we could select both of these, holding Shift, and add an auto layout. Look at that. Very nice. Okay, so we're also put in the logo of NVIDIA. So I'll copy that, switch back to layout, and I'll just put it right underneath. All right, so that works. Maybe we can make that type a little bit bigger. So remember, when it comes to your typographic visual hierarchy, you don't want to have things too close in size, but still different. For instance, the size of this type is 60. The size of this type is 35. If I just made this 50, it kind of looks like the same size, but not. You want to avoid that sort of thing. You want things to be obviously different. You want them to be able to contrast enough. So that's important as well. And also, by the way, you could take all three of these elements and you could put them into an auto layout if you wish. Now, if you did that, notice how we have more white space between here than we do between these two elements. So if you were to take these and put them in an auto layout, notice how it makes them equal. If you want to avoid that, you can make these two an auto layout themselves, and then hold shift and select this and make that an auto layout. So now we can adjust this individually, and then we can double click into here and adjust that as we need to. Okay, so this is a very simple section. And what's really cool is like once you start to understand front-end development, which is the process that occurs after this UI process here in Figma, it's the process that takes, okay, we're gonna have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and we're gonna make this thing work on browsers and make it reactive and function. Well, you could take a very simple design like this. This is a very simple section, typographic section. And we could do things like when they scroll down, each of the letters kind of fades in or comes in and animates into position. So you kind of have to have a little bit of foresight and understanding of what is possible in the front-end development step afterwards so that you can be the best UI designer that you can be. So there's a lot involved to this process. And of course, these are all things that are covered in my course. So now with that section done, let's do another section real quick that has cards. Cards are another design foundation. Cards are apparent in almost everything. Almost every website has a card aesthetic to it. And a card is just basically the encapsulation, the physical aesthetic encapsulation of information, typically repeated in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to create very simple cards that has kind of a title with a brief description. And they're going to be wrapped in this very simple little card aesthetic. So if I look at my reference really quickly, I'll get some ideas. So automated appoint scheduling. So this section is going to be outlining some features of this service. So one of those features is automated appointment scheduling. Okay. Now I'm going to use our other font, by the way, which is Consolas. Oops, I typed it in wrong. Consolas. There we go. And we are going to left align it. We're going to increase the size. Maybe something right around there. And then we're also going to duplicate it. So hold Shift, Alt, and then left click and drag down, which is what I'm doing there. We're going to change this to our other font, which is Manrope. And this is going to be a description. So a title is typically larger than a description. So we're going to make this a lot smaller, maybe size 20. All right. And then for that, I'm just going to make up something. AI agents allow you to easily create appointment scheduling with ease. I don't know. Okay, something like that. And we can also adjust other things about the type, by the way. So like the line height, we can just select this and increase it if we wish, maybe right around there. Maybe we'll have, 3 lines of type or so. And if we select both of these, we can put these in a auto layout. And then I want to take a frame and wrap it around them like this. This is going to be our card. All right, so now we have a card, and inside of it, we're going to drag the frame 7 into frame 8 over here on the left of my monitor, just like that. And if I move this into place, we can kind of see what's happening here. So let's see, what we want to do is add an auto layout there as well onto the frame 8, which we'll rename to card. All right, and the width, we're going to do hug contents. And now we can see we have these little areas on the left and right, and this allows us to define our white space around certain areas. So if you notice, if I take this one and move it in, you can see these two values adjusting right there. If we want to adjust all of them kind of like this, we could do it like this. And that's fine right there. Now, of course, the card itself is not visible. You know, we could give it a background, like, that would be ugly. I don't like that. What I'm going to do is leave the white there, but we're going to add an effect. We're going to add a drop shadow, a real soft shadow, all right? And it gives a really cool effect. So let's click on your effect. We'll click plus, and by default, it gives us a drop shadow. Now, the default drop shadow you can see right here. I want to adjust this by clicking this little square box, and that brings up the settings for a drop shadow. So X, I'm going to put Y 0, but we're going to increase the blur big time. We're at like 100. I think 100 is fine or so. I also want to give our card a little bit of rounded corners. So right here under Appearance, I'm going to left click and drag that. Yeah, right around 7. And then I'm going to click back on here, and then we're going to adjust the opacity value down to around, I would say, 12%. All right, so now if I increase this and we make that stuff centered, all right, I think that looks pretty good right there for now. Now, what we'll want to do is we want to make duplicates of these, right? I mean, I do. So instead of just duplicating them, well, anything that repeats should become a component. So what we'll do is create a component up there. And I'll just drag this off over here, put a frame around it. All right. Again, I hit F and then just left click and drag that. And then what we can do is, if we wanted to have like a hover state, we can add a component variant. We don't have to though. Just the fact that we made it a component, we go back to assets and drag that bad boy in, it is now a component at least. So what we can do is, let's say for instance, we'll have this one offset a little bit. We're going to duplicate holding Shift and Alt, and then select both of them and create an auto layout. That way we can duplicate this one and this one, and we can keep on duplicating these. And then maybe we can duplicate this one and offset it. And maybe in the front end development section, we could create a carousel where this one is going slowly this way, moving, and then this one is going this way, slowly moving. And each of these cards, of course, would need to be updated with unique content, based on the services that, the capabilities of this business or this product, right? So that's a real cool way that you can just present information in a card format. All right. So outside of that, since we're just about done, let's create another secondary call to action. And this one is going to be very simple as well. So if I take this and go down just a bit more, let's create another button that will be centered in our design. And it's going to say, explore the many use cases of AI. All right, awesome. So now let's switch this to our Manrope font. And by the way, the typography itself, all the typography, you can add those as styles as well. We haven't done that. We probably should have. But that would allow you to easily change the fonts in one location rather than having to go through all these and mess with them should you decide to change the font or somebody else wants the font changed. So now what we can do is just go ahead and make this smaller, maybe around size 36 I think is good. And then I'm going to use an arrow line tool, so Shift L. That simply selects this tool right here, the arrow tool. I'm going to left click and hold Shift, and that gives us a nice little arrow. Hold Shift. We can go ahead and turn this into an auto layout. All right. There we go. And there we go. We have a button. We can make it a component if we wish. We can create a little component variant animation. Actually, let me show you that real quick. So we make a component. Let's drag it off over here. And let's make a variant. So we click the plus sign. And let's say, for instance, when we hover over it, we want to change this arrow somehow, right? So what we could do is maybe adjust the gap like that. So it's going to push it out just a little bit. So what we could do now is switch to prototype mode. Oopsie. Drag a connection. This will be while hovering. Oopsie, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. There we go, while hovering. And then what you're gonna do, smart animate, like I mentioned before. So you can give it a duration of 300 milliseconds, that's fine. What we can do though, just to see this in action, is we can go back over here, drag that button in, make sure it's centered. Let's go ahead and select our artboard, click play. And if I zoom up, you could see kind of, it's really pixelated right now, but you could see how it animates that on hover, which is kind of cool. Okay, so now that we have that done, another thing that we could have that's you see a lot on landing pages is if we go back to our file and we click on assets, we'll see we have these logos right here. I'm going to copy all those, go back to layout, paste those in, and we want to make sure those are inside of our actual frame that we're working in. Why am I not seeing those? One second. We're going to make sure that we're working in our, let's see, it must be homepage. There we go. We want to take those into homepage. Now we can see them. Okay. So now this would be another area that would be kind of like a carousel that's kind of moving, showing all the different logos essentially. Okay. So this is already a long video, so I'm going to end it right here, this design of the desktop version at least. And let's say, for instance, you've designed all the sections. What would you do now? So it's like, okay, how is this going to look on a smartphone? It clearly can't just scale down. So let me show you the size of a smartphone compared to the desktop for a frame. So if we click the frame tool, we click phone, we click iPhone 16 Pro Max. Look how much smaller that is in width. So it's like, wow, how do you adapt this layout to that? And I'll show you just the beginning process. So what I would do is I would take this frame right here. This frame basically encapsulates almost everything. So if I move this over here or hit Alt and do that, you're gonna see it's gonna drag pretty much everything in. What I would rather do is just take, go back to our assets and just grab this element itself and go back to layout and paste this in. So maybe it goes like around there, and we'll grab the logo real quick. Now this time we wouldn't be able to use, well, we could possibly if we use some different component variants, this particular header component. But what I'm going to do instead is just grab the logo itself, copy that, Control C, paste it with that selected, and if I select this and right click and flatten it, we can now make it smaller, just temporarily. And then we can put in a hamburger menu. And there's another plugin called Iconify. Again, that's free. And we just type in menu. And we can just grab one of these. Maybe I'll put this one right there. Because you want to be able to, on mobile, you don't have enough room to put the entire navigation. You want to have a hamburger menu of sorts, kind of like right around here. And then it's just a matter of, you would have to design a state where you have the mobile navigation designed for like when somebody clicks or taps with their finger, you know, where's my phone, like this, and then it kind of slides out, having a design for that. And then you would take, okay, well, what's the next element? We have the header element, all right? So, or the headline. We can take this, copy that, holding Alt, and just drag it over, make it a lot smaller. So let's just try 50 for now. And you would just begin to make changes to this design to adapt to the new size, essentially. So maybe we would put it right there, and then we would stack this button underneath it. So this time it wouldn't be to the left of it, it would be underneath. So now we can make this a lot smaller, maybe size 24, and then decrease the size like right around there, and then drag this up. It's like, okay, we've just created the, I guess you could say, the mobile viewport of the hero section for this design. So now we have one for desktop, and now we have one for mobile. And you would simply recreate, you know, this entire process, making adjustments where necessary for these different screen sizes. So hopefully that was a very quick crash course that kind of just shows you what is involved, or some of the things that are involved with UI UX design, specifically UI in this case. And it's actually very rewarding once you build up your skill set, because it's like any other skill. It's like playing guitar or piano. You get good by practice. And so there's much, much, much more to learn. If you're interested in learning, definitely check out my UI UX design course at designcourse.com. And that's an interactive course, meaning that I have these interactive challenges, test projects that you can try out. It's take at your own pace. So definitely check that out and subscribe here, because going on to the future, we're doing a lot more of UI UX stuff, a lot of AI stuff as well. And so if you enjoyed it, leave a comment, a like, subscribe, and I will see you all very soon. Goodbye.